February 6th, 2022. We are 1 week away from Super Bowl. I don't even know what the number is, and I don't really care because the Packers aren't in it, and Matthew Stafford is. And those that have followed me know how I feel about that. So I am one game away from probably having to delete my Twitter account. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm Jacob Westendorf. I host and co-host, I should say, Tuesday's show with Jacob Morley and Ross Uglum. So you can check that out with the new lineup this week. And you can check out my friend here, Paul Bretl, on Thursdays with Jason Perrone and Mark Eckel. So I'm looking forward to the weather report making its triumphant return.
Yes.
With honestly, Paul, I got to give you, you are lucky. Mark Eckel is one of the greatest storytellers I have ever listened to. I think that Andy could give him a episode by himself, and I would listen to that for an hour. Mark's excellent. But welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Happy to be here with you, Jacob.
Yeah, good to be here in place of Andy Herman. So I do apologize. Andy is both much smarter and much more handsome than the two of us. So you don't get that today, but you get the two of us to blubber about a couple of different things. So the first thing I want to start with, it is February 6th. February 6th, 2011 is one of the 5 happiest days of my life, give or take. That number seems to keep rising, I guess, because it was number 1 for the longest time and then started to drop as I got older and realize some more things matter a little bit more than football. But since it is that day, Paul, I don't want to recap the game piece by piece, but I did want to ask, just what's your favorite memory from Super Bowl 45?
It's got to be the Nick Collins interception, the pick 6. When I think back to that game, that's the part that stands out to me. At the time, I was a freshman in college. We were all watching it together here in Green Bay, and just when I think back to that night, that's one of the memories that I think of, as I mentioned, the interception, but also just the room of about maybe 12, 15 of us just going absolutely wild when he crossed the goal line.
I think I left my body when that play happened because that's a play, obviously I was excited, but I was I couldn't believe that I was about to witness a pick 6 for my favorite team in the Super Bowl. Mine is Clay Matthews forcing the fumble as the Steelers are driving in for what would have been a go-ahead touchdown at the time. And then obviously that became even more legendary with the late Kevin Green being caught by NFL Films telling Clay it is time to make a play. And the other one off of that is Charles Woodson holding the trophy after previously seeing him in the game. He kind of celebrated a play and then immediately held his collarbone because his collarbone hurt. But yeah, special day, a lot of fun. Hope it's something that we get to experience again.
Absolutely.
And as soon as 2023, I would very much appreciate that. So Packers, if you're watching this, that is my one wish for 2023. So keep that in mind, unless you guys want to break my heart again. I suppose that's certainly possible, but that is not the only topic we are going to go over today. We're going to try and make this a little interesting for you guys. So we got a couple of game of threes, if you will, here. So we're going to play this or that. And I'm going to tell you guys now, this or that with the first one, Paul. Devondre Campbell or Rasul Douglas? Who are you picking?
I'm going to take Devondre Campbell. So a couple of reasons. And a lot of it has to center around the cornerback position versus the linebacker position for Green Bay. And, of course, a lot of this can change once free agency, the draft hits. But at this moment, Devondre Campbell, the Packers have Jair Alexander. They have Eric Stokes. Slot cornerback is a question mark, but they have a very, very good foundation there. At linebacker, it's a whole lot of question marks. It's Chris Barnes, Ty Summers, Isaiah McDuffie. And we saw Barnes, he took his lumps, had his ups and downs, but he was more effective this year. But it was in that Robin role compared to 2020, where he was more the Batman when Christian Kirksey was out. We saw Devondre Campbell do it all for this defense. A very, very reliable tackler, had the fewest missed tackles among linebackers in football. Limited pass catchers, effective against the run, solid blitzer. He did it all and gave Green Bay a presence in this defense that they just haven't had in a number of years. So, and looking back at that Lions game, I know it didn't mean anything. I know the Packers were running some very vanilla defenses, but Jared Goff was, I believe, if I remember correctly, 15 of 16, 250 or 150 yards, attacking the middle of the field without Devondre Campbell there.
250.
Yeah, no kidding. And then the playoff game, we've seen this Niners defense run all over Green Bay, and it's not 100% because of Campbell, but having that type of player at the linebacker position certainly helped Green Bay slow that Niners rushing attack, which, as we've seen, has hurt him before and is also a very potent one. So for all of those factors, Campbell's play at the position, the state of the linebacker position if he's not back, the fact that Green Bay does have Eric Stokes, Jair Alexander to lean on, and also if we're factoring in the salary cap, I think Devondre Campbell is going to be less expensive than what Rasul Douglas would be as well.
And I don't. So that's interesting that you say that, because here's the thing. So both players were the island of misfit toys, right? Rasul Douglas pulled up off a practice squad. Dre was off of the scrap heap. They got him after the draft, which, like, if a team signs you after the draft, it's kind of like, well, we didn't really want you, but, you know, we couldn't get what we wanted in the draft, so we signed you, kind of thing. And then Dre comes out and has a first-team All-Pro kind of season. Douglas got a couple of votes, but was not an All-Pro. So I wonder if Campbell will parlay that into a bigger contract. I am saying this. I'm picking Rasul Douglas, but I say that with an ode to Devondre Campbell, because I know for years Packer fans have screamed about their inside linebackers and everything of that sort. And I understand that. And one of my least favorite counterpoints to that is, well, this team just won, like the Chiefs a couple years. Like the Chiefs won the Super Bowl and they had guys like me and Paul playing linebacker. That's all well and good. The problem with that analysis is no other team has Patrick Mahomes and that offense from that season to build that year. The goal is to build a really good defense. Can you build a really good defense without linebackers like that? Certainly. But it doesn't hurt to have those guys. So in a perfect world for me, they keep both of them and they add another guy next to Devondre Campbell and just kind of play the base defense that the 49ers under Jim Harbaugh and Vic Fangio were able to play for so many years. But that being said, number one, I do think Douglas is going to come back cheaper. Number two, you can't have enough quality cover corners in the league. I mean, you just saw it this year. Jair Alexander missed basically the entire season. And the Packers defense, for the most part, was fine, which is interesting because if I had told you at the beginning of the season, Alexander is going to miss 3 months, you'd have said they are in some trouble. And they weren't. Largely because of Rasul Douglas. And I think pairing a trio for the next 2 or 3 years of Alexander, Stokes, and Douglas said he was willing to play safety if that's something they wanted him to do. And I think he has a skill set that could translate to that and allow Darnell Savage to do some more things that he's better at. But I do think he's going to be cheaper. And ultimately, as you guys know, with the cap in that situation, that might be something that matters more than maybe it would in a normal year, especially true if Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are going to return, which I suspect both of them will. Let's move to our next one. And I'm asking you to pick two. So again, we are assuming that Rodgers and Adams are coming back for the sake of this exercise. So Paul, I ask you now, pick two: Allen Lazard, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Robert Tonyan.
First one I'll take is Robert Tonyan. A year ago at this time, or roughly, the tight end position looked about as stout as it had been in Green Bay in quite some time. Here we are a year later, and we're back to question marks, which is where that unit's been largely for a decade or so. But the Packers have DeGuara coming back. They have Dominic Daphne. Mercedes Lewis, we'll see. But what that unit doesn't have is a true pass-catching option at the tight end position. Hopefully DeGuara can become more effective in that role, but he's not going to become a big Bob Tonyan of sorts. And so having Tonyan back is going to be a big difference for this offense. His absence, I think, is one of the reasons why we saw a less effective offense in the red zone. And then just in general, the offense, they didn't put up nearly as many points per game as they did in 2020, didn't have the same efficiency. And a lot of that came from not having that pass catching option in Tonyan. So I'm going to take Robert Tonyan. And then between MVS and Lazard, I'm going to take MVS. We know he has the deep ball ability. Devontae Adams, he can make big plays as well. Packers have other guys who can create big plays, but they don't have other guys who can take the top off the defense with 4.37 speed like Valdez-Scantling can. And while that's going to be his bread and butter, his game has progressed over the years beyond just that. We've seen him more effective on those intermediate routes. Rodgers, he talked about over the summer about the trust that he now has in him. And MVS had one of his perhaps the best summer of his career. Unfortunately, we didn't necessarily see all that translate because of injuries, but he's more than just a deep ball threat. There's the intermediate routes, the reliability, the trust that he has with Rodgers. And it was a very, very small sample size, but from the slot, he was one of the more efficient receivers in football as well. So he's expanded his game beyond that. I think not having him in the playoff game against San Francisco hurt this offense as well. Things just seemed a lot more condensed because the secondary, the safeties weren't worried about MVS and his speed out there. And that speed it creates for his teammates as well with the attention that he draws. So I'm going to take Big Bob and I'm going to take MVS out of those three.
I'm also going to take Tunyon for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. You know, big dog, love him. Josiah DeGuara, like him. But you saw in that playoff game against San Francisco, like you said, they just don't have that security blanket or a seam stretcher. And Tunyon can be both of those things. The ability to kind of make some plays in the middle of the field that way. DeGuara is not I call them natural pass catchers. Aaron Jones is an example of this to me. So kind of what I mean when I say that is if you look at the way they position their hands, like Aaron Jones, every time he catches a pass, it has to be with his hands up. And that's why, like that play at the end of the half, I tend to think that Rodgers threw him that ball a certain way because Jones isn't making over-the-shoulder catches because he's just not as natural in the passing game. DeGuara is very much that way to me as well. I think the dropped touchdown, if you want to call it a drop, against the Minnesota Vikings last regular season game at Lambeau Field, there was a play Rodgers zings one over the middle. DeGuara can't come down with it. I think Tunyon makes that catch with relative ease. I even think Mercedes Lewis might make that catch with relative ease, even though he may not be in position to make that play just because DeGuara could probably move a little bit faster. But DeGuara is better in a role player type of sense that he can move all around the formation. He can make some plays in the flat, but he's just not going to be that seam stretching tight end that can make plays, big plays down the middle of the field. You saw that there was another play in the playoff game where Rodgers kind of escapes the pocket, throws a pass to DeGuara. It's a drop. And it could have been a big play and a first down for an offense that, I mean, frankly, it looked like they were just trying to look for somebody to make a play to get them moving. And I don't think it needed to be a 65-yard touchdown. I think it just needed to be one of them drive extenders, like you said, a 15 to 17-yard completion to someone other than Adams. And then you've got the rest of the 49ers defense kind of thinking, oh, okay, we've got to account for this guy. We've got to account for that guy now. And maybe the Packers get some confidence back. I mean, this isn't a go over the 49ers game with you, Paul, but I am very much of the belief that the life just got sucked out of that Packers offense as soon as Mercedes Lewis fumbled. And they were looking for somebody to make a big play and capitalize on it because Jones made a big play later in the game, but then they get the field goal block. So it's like all the confidence they did get went down the toilet right after that. So I'm taking Tunyon. And again, when you're talking about contracts, I think he's going to be relatively inexpensive coming off of a knee injury that he suffered in the middle of October. So you're talking maybe October, November, December for him to be back on the field. So you could get him for a 2-year deal that the first year is kind of like a pillow deal. And then you make a decision on the second year after the fact, once you kind of know a little bit more what's going on with the cap and everything like that. The second guy I'm taking Lazard. And I know what you said about MVS. And obviously I got a lot of love for him. He was on a show on Game On Wisconsin for the whole season. A lot of love for that. But when it comes to guys around Devontae, and regardless of what the Packers do at the receiver position this offseason, if Rodgers is back, the passing game is still going to be built around Devontae Adams. I'm looking for consistency. And one of the knocks on MVS is inconsistency. And you can see that in his game logs. Now, that's not to say he's not impactful because he is in all of the games that he plays in. But you get those games where he's 0 targets, 0 catches, 0 yards, and you have other games where he's 4 for $120 and a touchdown like he had against Minnesota. But I'm looking for somebody like Lazard who can, not only that, I'm not even getting to the point of the running game yet, but I think Lazard, for the most part, he's had some struggles this past year, but for the most part is pretty consistent, steady Eddie, kind of reliable type. And I think players like Lazard that are willing to mix it up in the run game, be a goon or a war daddy or whatever phrasing that Matt LaFleur likes to use. I think finding those guys is harder than finding someone with deep speed. I mean, Deshaun Jackson gets dusted off every offseason. That was no to you, Pop. My dad hated Deshaun Jackson, but Deshaun Jackson gets dusted off every season by a team. It's like, oh, we need speed. Let's get that guy. and see what we can do with that guy. I mean, you saw a guy like Torrey Smith played for 4 different teams in 4 different years or something like that because of his ability to just kind of run that way. And they found him relatively cheaply. That's not to say that MVS's speed is easy to find, but I think it's easier to find than a receiver who's willing to kind of be a big part of Matt LaFleur's offense and this running game, which next year I look forward to taking a bigger step forward. I think the running game in Green Bay is what was the biggest deterrent, or I'm not sure what the right wording I should use here, but one of the biggest issues with the offensive line playing musical chairs last season is they couldn't get in a rhythm with that run game like they were last year, where the Rams, they ran the ball down their throat for 200 plus yards. They ran the ball against anybody they wanted to. And this year, I mean, can you imagine AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones were both excellent at making plays after contact this season. Imagine now next year, if those yards after contact are now after they get contacted at 5 yards instead of 2, you know, and I can't remember, there weren't many, if any, explosive runs the way there were like Aaron Jones had an 80-yard touchdown last year. He didn't have one of those this year. He had a couple nice runs, but nothing too explosive. And it felt so much fewer and further between. I think Lazard can be a big part of doing some stuff like that as well. So, Paul, is there anything else you want to throw at me for a this or that before we transition to my I Dream of Jeannie topic?
No, I think we covered the big ones as far as the free agents go.
Yeah, okay, so we hit that. So what I had was, I heard this on, sorry, Andy, Locked On Packers. Somebody asked Bukowski, poof, I gave you 2 or 3 wishes. 2 of them are Packers related, and 1 of them is just straight football related. So let's start with straight football before we get to the Packers. So what is your 1 football wish?
My 1 football wish is that we ditch the 17th game. We ditch the 7th seed in the AFC and NFC. Let's go back to 16. Hey, if you want to keep 3 preseason games, fine by me. But let's ditch the extra seeds in the playoffs. It's already, 12 is a good number. Honestly, if you want to reduce it from there, I wouldn't, argue a ton. But going to 14, nearly half the league, that's way too much. And we saw that this season in the wild card round with this 2 seed versus the 7 seed in both games just being absolute blowouts. And then the 17th game of the season as well. It just seems unnecessary. So I'm always going to be for, fewer teams in the playoffs rather than more.
I am 100%. I call them the Mickey Mouse playoffs, the 2 7 seed games. I have always in every sport been for contraction, lessening of playoff teams. And I fully understand that that's never going to happen. And I say that with all due sympathy to places like St. Louis and Seattle that have had professional sports franchises ripped away from them. I understand why those things maybe shouldn't happen. But one of my least favorite things they ever did in Major League Baseball was when they added what I call the participation trophy wild card team. You could call them the Mickey Mouse team if you prefer. And then, of course, the first year that they have that, the Chicago Cubs are the second wild card and they won 100 games that season. Everyone's like, see, they would have missed out. And there hasn't been a team that's been above. I think the 90-win Yankees this year were the first team to be that second wild card that had won 90 games. I could be wrong on that. But for the most part, that last team is a very average baseball team. The same is true, the 7 seeds. 3 of the 4 7 seeds. The Steelers were playing a cadaver at quarterback. The Chicago Bears last year were terrible. And the Philadelphia Eagles weren't any good either. And I've talked to countless Eagles fans that have told me we should have never been in the playoffs. And they shouldn't. It's essentially the same thing as a bye week for the 2 seeds. So go back. And not only that, the 1 and I know both 1 seeds were one and done this year. I know that. But that number 1 seed getting that bye and nobody else getting one, I think will, over a larger sample, prove to be such an advantage for those teams. Because in a perfect world, if Green Bay doesn't play like dog crap, then what they saw was everyone else around the league get more injured while their guys were theoretically getting healthier. In a perfect world, I know when we were talking after the Bucks played on Sunday, we're like, okay, so the Bucks probably lost Tristan Wirfs and Green Bay is going to get David Bakhtiari and Billy Turner back. Turns out they only got one of those guys back. That's the way it could have worked. Or you've got a team that's got to play that extra game. They already have to play one extra game. The the Los Angeles Rams are going to play 21 games this season. That's a lot. Yep. The same's true for the Bengals when they play on next Sunday. So I am all for getting rid of the Mickey Mouse playoff in the 17th and frankly the 17th game. I'm not going to argue too much with extra football, but I just think everything works better. It's a nice even number. But the reality, Paul, one day we're going to go to 18 games and we're going to go to 8 playoff teams and no buys. And I think that's coming sooner rather than later.
Money rules everything.
That's correct. And it always will. So that's the way that is. My football wish came true this weekend. So I'm going to say it. LOL, Minnesota Vikings. God bless you. I love you so much for trying your damnedest to get Jim Harbaugh to be your head coach. And I don't care. Don't let facts get in the way of a good dig. I love that he gave you the middle finger. And I know that's probably not what happened, but that's what I'm going with is that's what happened. Jim Harbaugh to be the head coach at the University of Michigan until the day he passes away or retires, because I did not want him to go to the Minnesota Vikings. He's definitely a guy that I think when he's on your side, you love him. And when he's not on your side, you hate him. And I would have felt really conflicted about this dude beating Ohio State, going to the playoff, playing potentially for a national championship. I know they got smoked, but I think everybody would have gotten smoked by that Georgia team. To then go to the Vikings, which is the team I hate the most. So my football wish was for Jim Harbaugh to not go to the Vikings, and it absolutely came true this weekend.
I think you brought up a good point. Me and you were actually texting about this because if Harbaugh ends up there, you brought up who's the defensive coordinator?
Potentially
Vic Fangio.
Yep.
And now they're running into that same staff that was running the Niners that knocked the Packers out of back-to-back playoff games in the early 2010s.
I think the number was he was 3-1. Harbaugh was against Rodgers and the Packers, and the one came with that worst 49ers team where Colin Kaepernick inexplicably just forgot how to throw a football. Like I remember from that game, Bill Huber, I think, called it one of the worst quarterback games he had ever seen to date. Fans were booing, asking for, I think it was Blaine Gabbert was the backup at the time. There was a check down 4 yards in front of him that he threw at the feet of the player. And it was a clean pocket. So it's not like he was rushed or anything like that. It was a bad day for the 49ers all around. But otherwise, for the most part, that's why when some fans were like, yeah, go ahead, get Jim Harbaugh. I was like, no, that dude's won 70% of his NFL games. And he made a living beating the piss out of these Packers teams for
he did.
What, a 3-year stretch. It was bad.
Yep.
It didn't go well for Green Bay anytime. And they really only played him close one time. Otherwise, it was a couple of beatdown. There was one beatdown on a season opener at Lambeau. And there was a smoke show in San Francisco. And I think there was another one in San Francisco that was, that game was kind of close, I guess. But it wouldn't have gone well. Right. So let's go to the Packers side of thing. What is your first wish for the Packers?
My first wish for the Packers is a fully healthy for all 17 games plus the playoffs offensive line. And a lot of that goes back to what you talked about with the run game. The Packers averaged almost 6 full points less per game this season, and there's always a number of factors that go into it, but a big contributor, I believe, was the run game. They went from averaging 4.8 yards per rush in 2020 down to 4.2. And those big plays that you had mentioned, Jake, Sharp Football measures them. Green Bay went from 55 explosive runs at 10 yards or more in 2020 down to 35. So there was definitely, with the movement along the offensive line, the injuries, certainly some inexperience in there as well. The run game was affected, and we know that this offense goes through Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, but for this unit to truly be at their best, that run game has to be utilized and also, running at its best ability. And for the most part this season, I would categorize it as effective enough. As you mentioned, a lot of that has to do with the play of A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, who were spectacular. But with a fully healthy offensive line, we hopefully see a much more productive run game, and then that's just going to help out the rest of the offense as well.
I agree. And yeah, the offensive line, and not only you mentioned that running game, but just then the ability and the confidence to use play action passing. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I can tell you with very, very much confidence in it that the Packers were less willing than ever under Matt LaFleur to have Rodgers turn his back to the defense and go hard play action. And you even saw in the playoff game when they did, it was ineffective because it can be effective when you have David Bakhtiari at his peak and Billy Turner playing right tackle. But when you have Dennis Kelly, who's struggling with Nick Bosa, and Billy Turner playing out of position in his first game back, and Yosh Nijman even to some degree before that, it's harder to do. So I
And
am always all for that.
I was just going to say too, the offense line and pass pro, they held up very well this year, but they had to be game planned for. The quick
Yep.
passing game was a big part of why their pressure numbers, the sack numbers were so good. When you have David Bakhtiari at left tackle, David Bakhtiari is fully healthy. That opens up again so much more in the offense because you don't necessarily have to take into consideration, all right, I have to have a tight end over here to help Yash. He has to chip. That's going to likely take him out of his, as being an early pass catching option. It just opens up so much more for the passing game as well.
Absolutely agree there. And that's something I think I'm the most excited about is, knock on wood, if they're able to get Bakhtiari back and potentially Elton Jenkins as well at some point next season. Because again, I am operating under the assumption that Rodgers and Adams will be back in Green Bay, just the ability to kind of have all their tools available to them, which they didn't this year. Speaking of Rodgers, my wish, if I were the GM, and thank whoever you pray to that I am not, I would trade Aaron Rodgers. And I wrote for Packer Report the day after the season ended, 2 days, that it was time to move on. And I said that because at some point you saw how that movie was going to end. It was very similar to the way when Favre was in Green Bay. They were going to win 10 to 12 games, get a playoff game at home, maybe win it, maybe not. But at some point there's going to be a multi-interception meltdown, or that was a multi-INT game, but Favre's last game in Green Bay where he threw the ball to Driver and every other option in the play was a better one. For those, if you haven't seen that picture, don't look at it. It's just going to make you upset. But my wish because of that then would be that Jordan Love is good. And I am one of the biggest Jordan Love skeptics. Didn't like the pick when it was made. Do not care about Aaron Rodgers' feelings. That's not why. I just didn't like the prospect, and the things about him are things I'm not so sure you can fix. But my hope and my first wish is that I'm wrong, because I'm trading Aaron Rodgers for a bounty. And when I get that bounty, it is such an advantage for the Packers to be able to use all of the draft capital they're going to get to build around him, instead of, one of the advantages they can get is potentially being able to trade up for Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, one of those quarterbacks in future classes if they decide Love stinks. Good Lord, that was a terrible pun. But if Love is good, then they can build around him. And instead of having to draft, instead of having 4 first-round picks at their disposal, they now have 6 because they didn't have to trade a bunch of them to move up to get one of those quarterbacks, or less. I'm throwing out random numbers out here. But mine is that Jordan Love is good because then you have that cheaper quarterback on a rookie contract, which is an advantage. It's not as big of an advantage as it's made out to be. I think, when you look around, like the Final 4 in the NFL this year, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks are on big money deals. And the other one, the Bengals might win the Super Bowl, and I am picking them to do so, I think. But it is kind of a Cinderella story on that. But 3 of the 4 were on big contracts. And I think it was like 6 of the 8 or something like that in the divisional round were on their big money contracts already as well. But you get that, the ability to build around him. I need Jordan Love to be good. Not only that, because if I'm the GM, and Jordan Love needs to be good to save my job, because I'm trading the back-to-back MVP in order to do so. Paul, what is wish number 2?
Before I get to that, I just want to add to what you had to say. Whichever route the Packers go with Rodgers, they just have to go all in on that decision. Because right now, and maybe I'm just misreading everything, but it seems like there's kind of this weird in between where, are they just going to try to hang on to Rodgers for another year or two and then transition to Love?
That's horrible if they do
exactly.
that.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
will get my point at the end here, but yes.
Okay, I was going to say, you either got to flip him now for all those picks and get as much as you can in return and reload, or if he's back for 4 more years, and you try to maximize again that window with him because he's still playing at an extremely high level. But trying to find this weird middle ground where maybe you get another year, maybe 2 out of him, but then the draft, or maybe he retires and you get nothing, or whatever you can trade him for at that time is greatly decreased from where it is now. And then you move to Love. I feel like whatever way they go, they just got to make sure they're 100% in on that option. Yeah.
Andy Herman talked about that earlier this week where, you got to be all in on one or the other. Mm-hmm. And again, if it's Rodgers, I was actually asked this by ESPN Lacrosse, what if Rodgers came back and said he only wants to come back for 1 more year? Well, then my answer would be, then we're trading you. Or going to try and trade you at least, because 1 more year, that doesn't really do anything. So he either needs to be, for Green Bay side of things, either needs to be the quarterback for 3 or 4 more years, maybe longer than that if he so chooses, or Jordan Love needs to be the quarterback and they need to figure out if he's any good or if they're going to be looking for another quarterback in a future draft cycle. So wish number 2, Paul.
My second wish, it's an obvious wish. It's a simple wish, folks. And I think we all have that wish. A competent special teams unit. We saw how this all ended, and I wrote for Cheesehead TV earlier this past week. It's going to take more than outside of this wish, because I can wave my magic wand, it'll just happen. But for it to actually change to actually happen for Green Bay, it's going to take more than just a change at coordinator, because they've gone through coordinators this past decade. They've still been one of the worst special teams unit for most of it. Rich Goslin, Sports Illustrated, comes out with his rankings. Packers have been 20th or worst 7 of the past 9 seasons. They've been last on 3 occasions. It's going to take an organizational shift in how they, the time they put into it. Obviously, I'm not at practice. I don't know what the breakdown is, but as the old saying goes, you get what you emphasize. And as we can see on TV, it certainly doesn't look like special teams is emphasized whatsoever. It's going to have to be the players that you keep on the back end of the roster. We talk about all summer, young guys' best path is going to be those special teams plays that they make. But with young players comes inexperience, comes mistakes. Green Bay might have to find some of those. Not that they're going to go out and spend big dollars on it, but if you can find a free agent who can maybe be your 4th or 5th cornerback, but he's got 500 special team snaps under his belt. And then, of course, as LaFleur talked about, that they're going to look into this offseason, looking at playing starters more frequently, which, of course, comes with its risk. We saw that in the playoffs with A.J. Dillon. But my point is, it's going to, for real change to happen, it's going to take more than just getting in the best special teams coordinator out there. It's going to be how they emphasize it. Who are the players that you're playing at? What's the time that's devoted to it? So a competent special teams unit is my wish.
Yeah. I mean, can we just please get somebody that will have 11 men on a field goal block that could make or break this? Like it was one of the most depressing listens, but it kind of made me laugh. I listened to Head of Pack with Matt Schneidman and Bill Huber the Monday after the Packers season ended. And Huber was like, only the season on the line. That's all. Couldn't be bothered to have 11 guys out there. Just the season. That's it. Like,
that was just like the cherry on top of the season that was special teams
of the
for the
poop
Packers.
Sunday. Yeah. Yeah. My mom used to always make this joke about a hot fudge sundae with a booger on top. That's what special teams is with this Packers team. And it's been bad for a long time. And I agree with you about organizational shifts. I agree with you about all that stuff. But I will say, get a coordinator that has a track record of success. It doesn't have to be Rich Bisaccia, and it doesn't have to be anything, but just somebody who in the past you could say he's been successful before. So if it's not successful here, why not? Now you know the answer of, is it the chicken or the egg? And like you said, some veterans. Find a guy like Matthew Slater. Find Green Bay's version. Is Jeff Janis still in shape? I need to know.
and don't be afraid to, open up the checkbook. Teams can pay whatever they want to pay for the special teams coordinator. And that hasn't been a priority in Green Bay, but after last season, after the playoff game, it needs to be. Don't be afraid to pay a little extra to get the guy that you believe can actually turn this unit around.
That goes for players too. Like we were screaming, Paul, I think you and I, since late October, get a veteran returner. Get a veteran, long snapper, just maybe not long snapper, but definitely returner. And that's something I would do for next year, even though, and I will give credit, Amari Rodgers was the least of my special teams concerns after that postseason.
Did you see that one coming?
I did not. No. And as soon as I saw him back there for kickoffs, I mean, I literally turned my head like so every time the ball was kicked in his direction. But I'll give him credit. He actually looked comfortable in what was the biggest game of his life to date. So kudos, Amari Rodgers. I still hope Cordero Patterson or somebody, maybe not him, but somebody like that is returning kickoffs for Green. Somebody, at least, when's the last time Green Bay had a threat back there that you're like, this dude could take it to the house? Micah Hyde? That's been a long time.
Probably.
I mean, Tyler Irvin was never that. So I'm with it. Definitely add to the special.
Tyler Irvin just gave us some 10, 12-yard returns, and we were just so deprived of it that we were all just, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. It saved him from what, negative return yards for an entire season, which is incredible that was even possible. But that's special teams in Green Bay Packer land, I guess. My wish is that Matt LaFleur lives by his philosophy. All gas, well, alleged philosophy. All gas, no brakes. And I don't think the Packers lost a playoff game this year because he didn't go by that. I just think there were too many instances, games this year where you even heard Rodgers and like Devontae and guys like that talking about, oh, we took our foot off the gas. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can hate Belichick and those Brady Patriots and everything like that. And I will say, I wanted to mention this at the top, but I forgot. I think a lot of us got our one football wish when Tom Brady retired earlier this week. So there's that. Kudos, Tom, and I hate you, but I respect you. That's all I can really say at this point. But with LaFleur, it's okay to be, like I remember the Patriots, they'll be like, oh, they're still passing and it's 45-7. Maybe that's a little extreme, but it's okay when you're up 24-14 to make it 31-14 because now the game's over. 3-score lead. A lot of teams don't come back from that any longer. The Packers have had chances this year to do that. They had a chance to bury the Cleveland Browns. They didn't do that. They had a chance to bury the Baltimore Ravens. They didn't do that. I mean, there were so many games this year that were closer than they should have been. So that is my wish, that whether Rodgers is back or not, kind of the Bruce Arians philosophy, no risk it, no biscuit. Be willing to bury teams and go win a game instead of trying not to lose it. There are a lot of games where Green Bay starts playing, instead of playing against the team on the field, they're playing against the clock. And I understand that to some degree, but you didn't have that running game and stuff to do that this year like you did last year. And you weren't as efficient in the red zone like you were last year, where like anytime Green Bay got inside the 20 last year, it was like, okay, who's scoring the touchdown? This year it was like, maybe they're not scoring a touchdown at all. And a field goal is, Joe Buck said on the broadcast of the Packers-Niners game, it's a 25-yard field goal or something stupid like that. He says, field goals, no sure thing with this unit. They know. So you got to be able to do better than that. So with LaFleur, go win games. Don't be afraid to lose them. That's going to do it for this edition of Pack-A-Day Video. I apologize. It went a little bit longer than what you're probably used to with Andy. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. If you're on there, go to my page. I put up a t-shirt that is a memorial for my late father, and it's 100% of the profits go to the baseball diamond that he worked so hard at over the years. If you don't want to purchase a t-shirt, send me a direct message and I will give you different ways to donate to that and certainly be able to get those funds to the appropriate party after that. If you want to find Paul, the hardest working man in the Packers blogosphere, where can we go to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. You can find all my work at Cheesehead TV as well as Dairyland Express.
So there you go, at Dairyland Express, Cheesehead TV, Pack-A-Day podcast. Chances are, if you Google Packers, you'll find one of us at one point or another. So a pleasure for Andy to have us here tonight. Thanks to Paul for joining me. We'll see you guys.